Good evening. I have to hold this microphone now because you can hear me, but it's going straight to the videotaping. So it sounds like I'm really doing something stupid, but it has a purpose. My name is Akram Khatir. I'm a professor of history, and I'm the director of the Khayrallah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies here at NC State. On behalf of the center, we welcome you here with us tonight for this event. It's our last event of the semester and last event of the year. I know you can all get very excited because 2 more weeks and we're all free. So I thank you again for being with us. Tonight we're incredibly privileged to have with us Dr. Maha Shuayb. But before I speak about Dr. Maha Shuayb's credentials and introduce her to you, I'd like to ask you for a favor. Please take out whatever electronic device you have and completely turn them off. No airplane mode, no sleep mode, just completely turn them off so that it is absolutely a dead brick. All right, so please put away computers and everything just because we prefer not to have those as distractions. Thank you so much. Dr. Shuayb flew last night from Lebanon, so we are very, very lucky to have her. She's incredibly busy, but she was very kind to she was supposed to be here February, but because of certain scheduling conflicts with the 3 winners commemoration, we decided it would be better to have her here, and she was very nice to actually postpone her trip and rearrange everything. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. So Dr. Maha Shuayb, originally from Lebanon, is the director of the Center for Lebanese Studies, which used to be in the United Kingdom, but now it's based in Beirut, Lebanon. She's also the president of the Lebanese Association for History, and we have a lot of that in Lebanon. She has a PhD in education from the University of Cambridge. She was a visiting scholar at various institutions and universities, including University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, and the American University of Beirut. Maha's research focuses on the sociology and politics of education. Her research area includes refugee education, education and social cohesion, citizenship education, and history education. She has many publications that have appeared since 2012, including Rethinking Education and Social Cohesion, The Art of Inclusive Exclusions, Educating Palestinian Refugee Students in Lebanon, and other publications as well. But most importantly, I think what's important to keep in mind is for those of you who have been following the news, the Syrian Refugee, as it's labeled when it gets to Europe, crisis, has been with us for a while. There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of issues that are emerging. And while the focus tonight, of course, is going to be on Syrian refugees in Lebanon, which has about 1.5 million by latest estimates, far more than anything in Europe for a country especially of 5 million. Dr. Maha Shuayb will also be able to address the larger issues surrounding refugees. She will address specifically education for refugee children in Lebanon, but the talk, as I said, and especially the questions and answer will deal with larger issues. We expect the talk to go about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Maha Shuayb.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Is the mic clear? Okay. No? Okay. I think we might have to increase the volume. Okay, I think that's better. Shall we have the presentation projected?
That would be a good idea.
Okay, thank you very much for coming today. So today I'll be talking about the education of the refugees. And because I've been into this for a very long time, 4 years, actually 5 years, coming to 6, so I've kind of learned it by heart. So and I assume that people know it too. So please feel free to stop me in the middle of the presentation if you get stuck on a very, something that is unclear, because it might affect your ability to follow up the issues that I want to highlight. So since I did my PhD, my main interest has always been equity and equality in education. And before the Syrian refugee crisis, I was interested in issues concerning equity and equality for the various groups in Lebanon in terms of access to education and the quality of education they were getting. I was interested in the Palestinian refugees as well, and because we've had refugees, as you know, in Lebanon since 1948 with the creation of State Israel and the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Lebanon. Just to give you a bit of an idea about Lebanon, I'm not sure how much you know. I know there are a few Lebanese here, but those who are not familiar, it's a small country of a population of 4 million. We have 11% of the population are Palestinian refugees. And we have different religious domination sects in Lebanon. So this is just as a background. Since the beginning of the Syrian crisis, we've had around 1.2 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Some people say 1.5 million. Some people, the number really fluctuates. There has some that have left and some, that came recently, depending on the war in Syria and which zones they have to flee. So as you can imagine, it's a severe crisis for any country where, a third of the population is refugees now. When the Palestinians came in 1948, they were housed in camps. So they didn't integrate within, all over Lebanon. They were placed in different camps in Lebanon. When the Syrian refugees came, the government was really persistent that no camps shall be created. They were worried about creating kind of like security zones where the Lebanese army may not be able to get in, so they didn't want to go through any of that, which had happened previously. So the Syrian refugees are, living across the Lebanese community. However, we do see what they call now unintended settlements, they call them. They are like camps, but they are, like groups of Syrians that live together in particular areas, and sometimes they can be a few thousands in camps. They look like camps, but the government prefer not to call them camps. But my interest is education, obviously. So today I'll be talking about education, but hopefully we can also talk about other things that might be of interest to you. To go to education, what effect had the Syrian crisis on the Syrian children in the whole region, for all Syrian children? We can see that it really had a huge effect. In Turkey, half of the children are out of school, Syrian refugee children. In Syria and Lebanon, they say 40%. Some people say it would be at least 50% of children are out of school, and some of them have been out of school for 5 years. In Iraq, it's 33%, and in Jordan, it's 15%. As you know, the majority of refugees are between Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, but Lebanon is the country that hosts the highest percentage of refugees compared to its population. Okay, in Lebanon, we have 400,000 Syrian refugee children who are school age. Okay, so we're talking about a large number. Before that, just to give you an idea, the number of Lebanese children in school in Lebanon, all of the children are 400,000. So you're talking about doubling the capacity of the system. So what happened since the crisis began? The Syrian refugees were allowed to be registered in public schools in Lebanon, and you can see how the numbers started to increase gradually. So they were allowed to enroll, and the numbers started to increase, but then lots of issues came up. The first issue in Lebanon is that those who are Lebanese, we pride ourselves that we speak different languages, particularly English and French. So in Lebanon, since KG, you start to learn second languages. We actually see it as a first language. We'd like to believe that we are very fluent. It's not necessarily the case. And you learn math and science in French or English. Physics, chemistry, all of these topics are learned in a second language. For the Syrian refugee, in Syria, they only learn English as a foreign language, and they usually learn it in their upper intermediate when they are around 14 years old. So usually they have a very poor command of English. So when they come to Lebanon, one of the main obstacles they have is the language. So that's why the government started to say, we can't integrate them with our children. We have to open second shifts for them. So they started to open afternoon shifts, they were 4 hours. They start from 2 to 6. Now they expand them to 6:30, and they give them 5 hours of learning. So language was number one issue. And there was the issue of capacity, and there was the issue of obviously every country believes its educational system is superior. There was the argument that the Lebanese educational system is way too advanced for the Syrian refugees. We shall see if this is actually true or not. So the numbers started to increase. Now we see the majority of Syrian refugees actually learn in the second shift. They are segregated from the Lebanese, and they don't actually see the Lebanese except in front of the school between the two shifts. Okay. Just to give you also some background information about our public school system. So in Lebanon, we have obviously free education up to secondary, and also we have a free university education. But the quality is so poor that a very small percentage of Lebanese children go to the public sector. What's the percentage of students in private schools in the USA? Any idea? Anyone know the percentage? No? I think it will be much, much smaller than those who are in the public. In Lebanon, it's the opposite. Only 29% of the population go to public schools. So a very small percentage go to public school. The majority go to private schools because if you want your kids to make it, you will not send them to public schools. So if you're extremely poor, you will even try to borrow money to send your children to private schools, because if they go to the public system, they will hardly ever make it. So in my village, we have a public school that can take 400 children. Before the Syrian crisis, we had 26 children in that school. Just to show you, schools were empty, particularly primary, and suddenly we see Syrian refugees. Now this school has 100. The school administration is very happy. Finally, they have students to work with. So the student-teacher ratio was 1 teacher for every 7 students. So it was a very, very low student-teacher ratio, and that's because of the poor quality of education. So, okay, sorry, I'm messing around with this. Okay. Any questions until now? Please feel free to, okay. So what has happened since the Syrian refugees came in? In the beginning, the government was in a state of denial. I remember calling the Ministry of Education and speaking to the person in charge of this file, and I told her, look, so what are your plans for the Syrian refugees? She said, oh, it's all exaggerated. I said, they're expecting around 100,000 Syrian children to need access to school. And she said, do you believe all of this? It's a load of nonsense. We maximum expect 30,000 across all of Lebanon, so it's not an issue. So they were in a denial, as many of us were in the beginning of the crisis. No one expected that it's going to be dragging on until now. So what we had formal education, and by formal I mean it's an accredited school certificate, okay? So we started to see students who are learning, schools offering the Lebanese national curriculum, which all schools have to teach, all public schools have to teach. It's usually unmodified, it's in English or French, depending on the type of school you're in, because you can be registered French section or English section, and accordingly you'll learn all the subjects in the second language that you choose. So Syrian children started to enroll in public schools, teaching the national Syrian Lebanese curriculum, unmodified. So imagine you're thrown in grade 5, you don't speak a word of English, and you're not getting any additional support, and you have to learn math and science in English. So, as you'd expect, many children were getting out of the school. There were lots of bullying, lots of harassment and violence in these schools. So we see huge high dropout rate. We're talking about 70% at least in these schools. Then we saw some private schools started to take the initiative. So we see quite a few Islamic schools, particularly that were sympathetic with the revolution, started to offer the curriculum in Arabic. So they started teaching math and science in Arabic, and as private schools in Lebanon, you're allowed to teach whatever you want, any curriculum you want. So in Lebanon, there's a German curriculum, there's a French curriculum, there is the IB, the International Baccalaureate, and there's the American as well curriculum. So you can get an American certificate in Lebanon. So these schools took advantage of this flexibility, and they started to teach the Lebanese Arabized curriculum. Okay, and then we see some schools that started to open and teach the national Syrian curriculum. But these were not certified. They used to take all the children to Syria, They do the exams there, and then they come to Lebanon. But as the conflict started to really get much worse, it was very unsafe to send the kids back to Syria. So then now you don't see any more schools offering the Syrian national curriculum. And then you see Syrian coalition curriculum, and this is the Syrian opposition. They set up schools and they revised the Syrian national curriculum. They changed a lot of things in the textbooks, and they started to offer a coalition certificate. The issue with coalition certificate, it's only accredited by a few countries, such as France, Oman, Qatar, Mauritania for some reason, and I think Ethiopia for some reason. And Turkey, of course. The issue is when you're offering schools like this and your children register in these schools, you're seen as part of the opposition. So you can no longer go back to Syria. And this where many parents were really regretting registering their children there because it's uncertified in Lebanon, and because the war dragged on, their kids had to, like they said for the baccalaureate, the coalition baccalaureate, then it was unaccredited. They had to repeat their year for at least a second or third time in order to get an accredited certificate. And this is very important to continue going back to university. So you see how education actually created really big, even political issues. And then, amazingly, we also started to have the Libyan curriculum. And these are schools that offer the Libyan curriculum. It's very easy to pass, and it's certified. In Libya, I would give you a certificate. And the children had to go to Turkey to set the exam. And this was okay the first 2 years, but then people's passports started to expire. They were unable to renew. It was more difficult to fly girls and to let the parents let the girls go and set the exam. So now you don't see any of this anymore. Now the majority of students are doing the Lebanese official curriculum, and we will talk about the issues that happened there. So is that okay? Any questions before I move to the next point? Because some of the terminologies might be new to you, and okay. All right, then we see the first 2 years of the crisis. You see that, usually when a crisis happens, what's the first thing that, who usually respond? Who's very quick to respond when you have a crisis, an emergency like this? Sorry? NGOs, exactly. The NGOs are usually far more flexible and quick in responding. So you see a kind of a euphoria of NGOs in Lebanon, of all nationalities trying to provide support for these Syrian children. And as the crisis started to go on, they started to offer various forms of education. And which is like accelerated learning programs. So children have been out of school for a year or two. They would give them intensive math and science and literacy. They start to give them psychosocial programs for their emotional well-being, and remedial to be able to make up. So if you've, let's say you've only attended 1 month of schooling, so they give you an intensive educational program so you can move on to the next grade. The issue with the non-formal is that it's very popular with the Syrian refugees because it is tailor-made to fit their needs. So children and parents really prefer formal, although it's unaccredited. It has high retention rates, but the issue of it is it's unaccredited. So the government would tell you, you have to repeat your grades because you don't have certificates. So these are some of the advantages. So the formal is that you have a very comprehensive academic program. However, it's very rigid. So for instance, you have to learn the history of Lebanon and the civic education and the laws of Lebanon. It's very of little interest to children who might need intensive language programs, but they won't give them extra language. It's 7 hours of language a week, and that's all you get. You won't get extra to be able to develop your language. But it's accredited, but it has usually low retention rates and very high repetition rates. And at the moment, the majority of children, of Syrian children, go up to grade 6. Beyond the grade 6, the percentages start to drop to less than 20%. So children who are above 12 when the crisis broke out, they're likely to be out of school, okay? Because they can't make it. in the classroom. They enter the class. I'll tell you a story of a girl who was 15 years old. She was repeating her grade 5. Not sure. The grade 5 in Lebanon, that would be around 10 years old. She was 15, and she was repeating a grade for the 3rd time. She still don't have a clue what's going on in the classroom. She tells me the first year, I didn't know the alphabets. So she was sitting, learning in English. She doesn't even know the alphabets. No one wanted to teach her the alphabet because there's a curriculum that she has to learn. And so she was repeating. She was telling me, like, my mom told me if I fail this year, she wants to marry me off. I don't want to get married at this age. I want to continue even though. But she's not getting any extra support. She'll only get the national curriculum that is very rigid. In Lebanon, the Lebanese government believe that this is a national issue. You know, like we only teach the Lebanese curriculum. And the fact that there are all these other curricula that are taught in private schools is not it's okay for them. The non-formal usually it's very short, so they are usually they enroll in programs of like a few months, and they are usually literacy and numeracy, but they're very flexible and adaptive. Usually, what these NGOs do is that they do needs assessment and they offer them programs based on the students' needs. It's not accredited, but they have very high retention rates. So what has the Ministry of Lebanon has done since the outbreak of the crisis? In Lebanon, we haven't signed to the international regulations concerning the refugees. So Lebanon considered itself that it doesn't have any regulations towards the refugees. However, we've signed several UN declarations and the Child Rights Charter and the human rights, which put obligations on Lebanon to offer education to every child under 15 years old. So you can find policies that say Lebanon doesn't have any obligations, and there are others that say Lebanon has obligations. But the government has been like, this is our national curriculum, take it or leave it. We're not going to change anything about it. And this is how it is. We're not going to make any accommodations. Then they started in the beginning to go, and here the law is also, again, very vague. In Lebanon, the law says that you can learn any subject. You can learn the curriculum and do your grade 12 exam in Arabic, English, or French. Okay, that's what the law says. But in Lebanon, no one really study Arabic up to grade 12. Usually they either choose English or French. So that's why everyone, I didn't know about it. I've been in the field of education for, quite a few years, So I didn't know that we were allowed to do grade 12 in Arabic. And then it turned out that they are allowed. But the ministry doesn't want this to happen. So they gave them the only change that they did is that you take the exam in English, you respond in Arabic. So you have to understand all the vocabs. So imagine yourself, I'm giving you this talk in Arabic, okay? And then I have to give you an exam on it and you can respond in English, okay? I'm not sure how helpful that is. You'll have to do lots of learning very quickly to be able to do a grade 12 exam. And then things got even worse as the crisis was developing. In the beginning, there was no quota on the percentage of Syrian children that can enroll in schools. The cost of the morning shift for a child is it used to be $150, then it jumped to $300. The afternoon shift, it costs $600. So if we're talking about currently around less than 200,000 children, you can imagine how much the donors have to bring money to fund this. The cost is very high. And then the government said to, only Lebanese teachers are allowed to teach the Syrians. We're not allowing any Syrian teacher to teach. And obviously, we don't have enough teachers, so they started to recruit anyone who has a university degree. So if you have a university degree and you're Lebanese, you're welcome to come and to apply to become a teacher. You don't have to have any education background or any, experience in teaching children. So, sorry, yeah?
The cost that you mentioned, is that per month or per year?
Per year.
Okay.
Okay. And then the government, in the beginning, there were lots of NGOs. And the government started to say, oh, no, there's too many NGOs. Their work is not coordinated. We're worried about them becoming, recruiting for extremists, etc. So we need to regulate it. So they put kind of restrictions on NGOs' work. They stopped allowing them coming to public schools and supporting the teachers. They said, no more. You're not allowed to come into the schools anymore. And they started, pushing for the children to go into the public sector, although students were really preferring the non-formal because it's far better in quality, and particularly the issue of bullying and discrimination, which I haven't referred to yet. When I describe to you the level of discrimination, and the tensions between the Lebanese and the Syrian, and by segregating them, you're making it even worse. At the moment, what's the worst moment for students? When we ask them what do they fear the most, it was coming to the school. Just that, the walking distance they have to make. And just in front of the school, you would see knifing, you would see verbal abuse, physical, all sorts of issues that, children would show us the injuries that had they had endured as a result of the tensions between the Syrians and the Lebanese. So most schools, they have like a very big process for the student exchange between the morning and the afternoon shifts. So they come and they put the staff, they create like a human shield just to prevent any kind of clashes. Still, you see students in the morning shift leaving all sorts of racist comments on the on the desks, on the walls. And for them, the Lebanese is like, oh, why did you take my desk? I want to leave my stuff in that desk, and you're not allowing me to do that. Or they would put restrictions on using facilities. Like in one of the schools, they wouldn't allow children to go to the toilet because they don't want them to damage the toilets. And all sorts of things that the kids suffer from. Back to the hegemony. So the government said, I'm the one to deal with this file. No one has to do anything with it. So they got all the money. They developed a strategy, which is a very good step, a 3-year strategy for absorbing these numbers. And they told the donor, this is how much we need in terms of money, and you have to coordinate with us. And this is very important for the government to assume power. But it's the lack of collaboration between NGOs was one of the issues. Sorry, did you have a question to ask? Oh, okay. All right. From the inclusion, now we see the vast majority of Syrian children in public schools are learning in segregated school environment where they really have very little interaction with other Lebanese. Okay. So I want to look about, is the challenge really capacity? The government says all we need is money to get these children into schools, but is the issue really about capacity? So this is the number of Lebanese children, all Lebanese children, so 924,000. And we have an equal number of public and private schools in Lebanon, but only 275 go to public schools, okay? So, and in primary, it's only 19, as I had mentioned before. So the myth is the Lebanese government keeps saying that our educational system is much better than the Syrian one, and that's why we shouldn't mix them, because this will lower the standards of the Lebanese students. But actually, when we see the differences in the TIMS, are you familiar with so there is national, worldwide exams that happen in math and science, and you can go and check the USA rank on these exams. Okay, so if you compare Lebanon to Syria, the Lebanese do much better in math, but actually the Syrians do better in science. And there is a reason for that, because if you learn science in your mother tongue, you always outperform someone who learns it in a second language, because the concepts are quite abstract. That's what the research tells us. Always if you learn science in a mother language, you will always outperform, even math as well. Okay, so in Lebanon, I'm not sure why this, okay. So in Lebanon, we have a very high dropout rate. Before the crisis, we had an issue with the quality of the public sector. We had, as you see, very high rates of dropouts amongst the Lebanese, okay? Particularly in grade 9, where they are 14, 15, they drop out a lot. We have very high repetition rates. So what I'm trying to say here is the quality of the public educational sector in Lebanon was already very weak and very poor. the very, very disadvantaged parents would put their children in public schools. So the issue is really not, in my opinion, it's about access. It's an issue of quality of education. And you have equal number of public and private. So you can easily absorb the 400,000 if you open the door to the private sector, especially that the money is there. Okay, oops. Okay, so for instance, if you look at the brevet, it's a grade 9 exam that we have in Lebanon. It follows the French system. So 74% of children who set the exam, they pass. And but if you look at, there's a huge difference between the public and the private sector. From the, UNRWA, that's where the Palestinians learn. They learn in UNRWA schools. It's a UN set up agency. And 13.6% only of Palestinian refugees who sit for the brevet, which is a grade 9 exam, pass. So there's a big issue with education of the refugees. Sorry, you had a question. Oh, sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask if the international exam was administered just to the public school students or to the private school students?
Both.
Both, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, the issue here is that in the beginning of the crisis, we start to see private schools trying to absorb public students from Syrian children. And then they started to give scholarships, lots of scholarships, but they couldn't sustain that for 6 years. So now all the money is coming to the government, and the government is saying, we will take all the students and we will manage them. But there is a big issue concerning, before the crisis, there was issue of retention and dropouts, and now the issue is even bigger. So, when we look at the relationship between the various sectors, the NGOs, the private, the donors, and the government, we see that in the beginning, the role of the NGO was really very big, while the state was kind of like in the background. Now we see a hegemony from the state, and the NGOs are completely pushed to the side, and there's even a kind of hegemony on the donors. So before I left, I was meeting someone from an organization who got money from UNHCR to do a project, and she told me, don't tell anyone, because I don't want the ministry to be upset. They're doing project with parents, educating parents. So, NGOs are very, who work with government are very reluctant to hide any work they are doing, because they think that the government will be upset that the UNHCR, you know what the UNHCR, it's the UN agency for refugees. They don't want the government to know that these UN agencies are giving money to NGOs, and these NGOs are working in the private sector. Okay, so the donors, they're encouraging this hegemony by insisting on giving the money only to the public sector. So I spoke to quite a few big donors, and I asked them, why don't you fund private schools? $600, you can easily, instead of waiting 5 years to enroll 400,000, now you can enroll 400,000, and you're paying for it anyway. But there's a reluctance from donors to take this step. Yes?
Compared to the total estimated financial need to spend on Syrian children, how much of that has really come in?
Okay, well, it seems what the government wanted for this year, they got all the money they asked for. But they had, and even last year, but they had a lower enrollment rate than they anticipated. So I was attending a donor meeting the other day, and they were saying that how much money they didn't spend last year, that was left over, which is really strange because the demands are really huge. So I think there's a donor issue of also how to manage the crisis. And there was an increasing role of the private sector, but now it's really dwindling, seriously dwindling, because they can no longer sustain themselves, and they're not eligible for any donor funding. And there's very little collaborations between NGOs and the private sector. They're trying to collaborate. So many NGOs are trying to buy licenses from private schools to get certificate education for children. And the reason they're doing this is because in private school you can be flexible with the curriculum. So instead of spending 3 hours teaching social studies, I can give those hours as extra language courses. Okay, so what does the research tell us? We at the center, we have conducted numerous studies. We've looked at the psychosocial needs, we've looked at the quality of education, various issues, language, how they're learning languages, and we're always comparing Lebanese to Syrian, just to see really, is it a refugee issue or is it a quality of education issues? So what we see is that high repetition rates were even higher amongst the Lebanese in the morning shift compared to the afternoon. And this is what research tells us. Poverty is always related to very low educational performance. So it's not about being Syrian or Lebanese or the language issue. The Lebanese were equally incapable of even writing a sentence in English. And we went to grade 7 and 8, so these are 13, 14. We asked them, just write any sentence you want in English. They're expected, just to give you an idea, they're expected to write an essay, at least of 500 words in English. And they're expected to do their math and science in English. They were unable to write one sentence in English. So the language issue is not an issue of Syrian versus Lebanese. It's an issue of, how much exposure they have to this. So we see high dropout rates. This is the other issue is we went to many schools and we found that they only go up to grade 6 in the afternoon shift. And we were asking them, why don't you have grade 7 and 9 and 8 and 9? And they would say, there's no demand. So children are unable to make it. They keep repeating. They come to grade 6. That's it. They can't take it beyond the grade 6. They drop out when they become too old for their age group. So very high dropout rates. We hardly see any students in secondary, by the way. So many donors now are interested in funding higher education. But the issue in Lebanon is that the percentage of the demand on higher education is very small because students are not making it through the secondary. So there's issue of literacy, and this is not only, by the way, second language. We have issues of literacy just like here, where English is the mother tongue. You have children who are not able to read and write as expected from their age. The same in Lebanon, we have issues of Arabic. Even students are unable to read in Arabic as well. And despite, we've done a donor mapping, and we've seen how much money was spent and where it was spent. Professional development was one of the main areas of investment. Yet when you go and see what's happening in the classrooms, it's very poor quality education. And so it's ineffective professional development that's happening. And there's a huge, the intensity of bullying is just beyond that you can imagine. Daily from Syrian amongst themselves, Syrian, Lebanese, also violence at home, etc. And also quite, the Syrians will tell you all the discrimination that they experience on a daily basis by the teachers. And the teachers don't know the parents at all, so they have very negative attitudes about the parents. Like the parents, they don't care about them. Although when we go and do the field work and we send for the parents, we send for both Lebanese and Syrian. And we usually get like 15 Syrian parents. And they usually come thinking that we can help them with their children. So actually you see that parents really do care a lot. But unfortunately, we will see a generation where the parents will be far more educated than the children. When we ask for the parents' education qualification, we know that their children will not go to the university. It's very unlikely that they will do it. And also you see very demotivated staff. These staff in the second shift, they're not paid well, and they have to teach 2 shifts, or they are new teachers. Usually if you teach, you get the money a year later, so you don't get it straight away. And it's actually not very well paid. Okay, so what are some of the issues, bottlenecks, and that we have in the education of the refugees? I think one of the things is I started to read more and more about education of the refugees. And here I want to ask you, do you think education of the refugees is different from educating any disadvantaged group? But we see a lot in the literature about education in emergency, as if it's very different, as if I enter into a classroom of refugees, it's different from if I go into a very poor neighborhood, children have been out of school for some time for various reasons. But in the literature, there's a big emphasis on refugees and emergency. But in reality, there's really not much as a teacher. There's not much that that is really different. And this is a very interesting literature, by the author Catherine Brune, who talks about most of the time when we deal with refugees, we deal with issues of survival, like how we can make them survive. And most of the refugee crises that we see around the world, they are rarely ever short crises. Most of the conflict become protracted. And you will have refugees who will be living under the status of refugees for 20, 30, 40, and like with the Palestinians, it's now almost 70. So really the issue of refugees, it's not, it doesn't really reflect the reality where you will have a population that will stay for a very long period of time, treated just for survival. So you give them the bare minimum rather than a good education where they can really hope for a better future. And here we have also a big issue of the donors. The donors, what they really want to show is that large numbers of students are enrolled. Okay, that's why it's very difficult to get rates about dropouts and repetition in Lebanon, because no one wants to hear about them. And with the Palestinian refugees, which is also donor-funded education, when donors give you money and you want them to continue to give you money, you have to show that students are passing. So you will exaggerate and inflate the passing rates. And you will promote children even if they can't make it. Even if they can't write, one sentence, which is expected from grade 2, let's say, you will promote them because you don't want to show a high repetition rate. And that's what's happening with Syrian. So teachers were telling me about grade 6 Lebanese and grade 6 Syrian. And grade 6 Syrian is what a grade 3 Lebanese child would be able to do, and grade 6 Lebanese would be a different. So then there will be a lot of dumbing the curriculum, and you can see these children won't really be able to get far. They will certainly won't be able to pass the grade 9 official exam. And the issue of policymakers. Now, when you meet the donors, you will see how stressed they are and what kind of a struggle they have with policymakers. Because, the one in control is the policymaker. And they will never upset the policymaker, because that means ruining their, all their programs. And because these donors get their money from their government, so they have to deal with government. They can't go and deal with NGOs. They have to deal with the government. And this, I think the donors can do a lot more, much bigger pressure on the government to do much better education. But they're not using that a lot. And there is the other issue of curriculum. Most countries have curriculum, but the curriculum is designed to just create some standards. But when the curriculum becomes the objective, and I don't care what happens to the students, they have to fulfill this curriculum, and it's about the curriculum, not about the student, then education really fails. In Lebanon, what does the curriculum mean? For most teachers, it's teaching the textbook. You will find that most teachers in Lebanon, if you go into they teach the same textbook and the same, and they won't give anything extra from the textbook. You find all the students, they're asked to underline, the text that they have to memorize. I'm sure for the Lebanese descendants, you are all familiar with the, underline the text and memorize it by heart. That's how it is in Lebanon. And unfortunately, we see, little collaborations across these sectors. While, if we really want to enroll the 400,000 now, we need collaboration. And I think that's what the donors, can push for greater collaborations to increase the access and to improve the quality of education. I will stop here. I usually don't like to talk for that long, so sorry if I have sent you to sleep, but I hope we can have now some discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so we will take questions and answers for about 45 minutes or so. And what I'd like to do is I'd like you to ask a question, and I'm going to repeat it just to make sure that everybody hears it, because I have a loud voice also, so we can record it. Mm-hmm. So please raise your hand, ask a question, and I'll repeat the question for everybody. Yeah, Noha.
I would like to ask, the well-off Syrian families in Lebanon, are they allowed to sign up their kids in the private sector?
Yeah.
Just a second.
And or the language barrier also, it's a problem, the foreign language barrier.
So the question is about those Syrians who are in Lebanon who come from better social income bracket, sort of upper classes. Do they face the same problems, especially with language, or do they have a different experience?
Yeah, sure. Some of them have already used to enroll their children in private schools in Syria, so their children would have been learning either in English or French, so they have an easier thing. But also, even if they don't have very poor command of English, they usually would give them intensive language, but they are allowed, anyone can register in the private sector. In Lebanon, the private sector has total freedom almost. There's only one condition, that you don't offend other religious groups. That's the only condition, but you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
Another question?
Yeah.
We'll go ahead.
You said that the rate of dropout, not dropout, the passing for the Palestinian refugees was 15%?
And yeah,
And 30-some for
30.
the Syrian refugees?
13% in the grade 9. And one of the years the Palestinians scored that low in the grade 9 exam, yeah.
Why is that? Although the Palestinians are more settled as refugees than the Syrians.
So the question is, it appears that the failure rate or dropout rate for Palestinians in refugee camps seems to be higher, even though those camps have been there for over 50 years, and it would appear that the schooling as well as the infrastructure is more established than those who are newcomers, the Syrian refugees. And yet the Syrian refugee children have a lower, if you will, dropout rate.
Thank you. This is exactly the point. It's not about education in emergency or refugees. It's about the Palestinians in Lebanon. They live almost in like camps that look like prisons. Okay, very, very poor conditions. If I tell you, and now because it's a very cheap place to live, now many of the Syrian refugees now live even in the camp. So if you have a house of 2 rooms and you need the money as a Palestinian, because you're not allowed to work in Lebanon except in manual jobs. I'm not sure if you know about this, but Lebanon doesn't allow either the Syrian refugees or the Palestinians to do any job that is not just manual. So you can be a doctor, you can be a teacher, you can do any kind of, any of these jobs, even if you have the certificates. So what happens with the Syrian refugees? They're living in slum areas, and now they even, live in smaller houses after they've split their room and rented it out to another family, and they live without a hope. That's the issue. They know that even if they continue their education, they won't be able to work, so this motivates children a lot. And poverty is always associated with very poor performance, and the housing issues and the family. And the curriculum is irrelevant. When I did my research, they actually feel more alienated because of the curriculum. So, for instance, these children would tell me, like, we learn about human rights, and what rights do we have? We learn about your elections, but we're not allowed to have, to participate in any form of social or political life in Lebanon. And the Syrians will have the same later on. Yeah.
If there is enough money and willingness, is there enough infrastructure and teachers available to educate all these children?
I think there would be. I think, and this would mean, investing in the private sector. So increasing the capacity. I think there would be. I think you have to do a lot of capacity building for teachers, because we have an issue of, poor teacher education on the whole, and we don't have also criteria for teachers who want to become teachers, like they have to have a teaching diploma or etc. So you need to manage this, but I think, yeah, there would be. But it's not only about the money, it's also about, the political decision of allowing private schools to get money from the donors to expand their education.
So at the end of the day, if these kids are educated, will they have an accredited degree like a brevet or baccalaureate to go to a college somewhere?
Right.
How is
Hold
it?
on. So the question is that if these Syrian refugees, if it happens that they actually do pass up to 9th and then 12th grade, and they pass the exams and they pass exams in an accredited program, will they be able then to attend post-secondary education, university or colleges? And so what are the hopes for that?
Only if it's accredited. So only if they go to either a public or a private school. Yeah, yes, of course they can, yeah.
Yes, Shah.
How much effort is expended to develop trade education?
Trade?
Trade.
Mechanics,
They do, boy.
Vocational.
conditioning, instead of purely academic.
You want to?
So the question is, aside from academic education, is there any emphasis on trade type of education? You know,
Okay.
carpentry, auto mechanics, so
Yeah.
on and so forth.
There has been a few initiatives like this by donors, particularly for the older children who dropped out and wouldn't consider enrolling in a formal schooling, but they haven't been very popular. It seems that we don't have enough studies, but it seems that the Syrian children prefer to work directly and earn money rather than enroll. So they prefer to learn on the job and make a living rather than going and registering in an educational program. But there are attempts and trials now. Like UNICEF is thinking of a program of only 3 weeks, vocational education. We call it vocational education. And then and actually I think they pay them as well during that, because many of the families, and like even UNHCR said, if you have a child who's above 15 years old, they won't give, you're not entitled to the allowance. So like they expect a child who's 15 years above to go and work. And there has been really a shortage of funding, so many people are not getting enough money, particularly if they have men or children above 15. So there is actually, they're pushing them in a way to join the market, job market, rather than to learn, get education.
Yes.
Related to the question on post-secondary education, how difficult is it to transition from secondary, if they finish, to a post-secondary institution, whether it's a university in Lebanon or outside Lebanon?
Yeah.
So the question is the transition from secondary to post-secondary education. How difficult it is to make that, gain admission to universities in Lebanon or outside of Lebanon?
They can go to the public university. The private would be extremely expensive. Now more and more donors are interested in funding higher education. They can. The issue is it still will cost them. That's it's very little cost in the public sector. And I'll have to say, actually, the government did something, the ministry did something new, which is positive. In Lebanon, if you drop out at any time I don't know how it is in the USA, but if I drop out at age 15, let's say, I won't be able to join in, like if I drop out at grade 8, and I'm now 20, I can't join in and do just the baccalaureate. I have to go back to grade 8, 9, 10, 11. Obviously, no one would do that. So now they've changed the system. They allow the Syrian who drop out to sit for the baccalaureate or grade 9. They don't have to repeat all the grades. And this is very important, because this means that some NGO can open a special class for children who want to set the grade 12 exam, give them 2 intensive years of education, and then they can set for the grade 12. And I think this is very important to get them back into university education. I think also this one. No, it's okay.
Speaking of NGOs, where are those NGOs that are kind of dealing with the refugees, centers of studies, and all of these? Where are they getting their funding from?
So the question is about who is funding the NGOs and the centers of research that focus on refugees in Lebanon and other places.
The NGOs, there's a lot of funding, obviously, that's being poured into the area. So I don't think that there's a shortage of money. It's the first time where you feel like, oh my God, there's a lot of money coming in. From various, the EU gives money. I think the main donor has been so far the EU and the European countries, which gives money to the UN agencies who distribute it to the NGOs. For us as research centers, we struggle always with money. We get commissioned to do research by UN agencies sometimes, and this is how we get our data, and we commission our research from the money that we raise from our donations.
There was a question here? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so from what I've gathered from the presentation that the Lebanese public education system was struggling before the Syrian conflict, and essentially the Syrian conflict has embedded racism into like this young group of children, so it makes that education system even harder. So what's the chance, like how likely do you think it is that the Lebanese government itself will make like a universal education program instead of having all these other competing non-accredited systems in place?
So the question is that it appears that the Lebanese education system before the Syrian refugees arrived in Lebanon was in a crisis. And with the arrival of the Syrian refugees, that created even more tensions that have manifested themselves in, amongst other things, racism. So the question is there a program within the Lebanese government, or is the Lebanese government capable of creating a national educational policy and curriculum that basically creates a uniform way for people to get educated and hopefully undermines that kind of division and also the bullying and all the other things that Dr. Shuayb talked about?
We can stay here for a day to answer this question. The issue with the quality of education, like Lebanon has received many grants to improve its education. Now the government is which I think rightly saying, any money we spend on Syrian refugees, we have to also invest in the Lebanese children to improve the system. But the issue is it's beyond the minister. There's a whole political system in the country that is based on power sharing, and a word the Lebanese know very well, wasta, which means, hire this person for me, and there's a quota between the different sects. So it's not only the qualified teacher is not the one who gets really hired. You can't fire a teacher in Lebanon. So, it's very, very difficult to fire a teacher in Lebanon. So, and this is one of the issues, is that how can you do a reform if you don't have, teachers don't have any promotions. So you start as a teacher and you finish 30 years as a teacher. You don't move much. The maximum you can become is a principal, which why would you do that? It's more work and little pay. They don't, we will, if you work and I don't, we get exactly the same pay rise. The increment that happens every year. So there are no incentives, and there's, and also you can't suspend a teacher for doing whatever. And this doesn't create any motivations among the teacher. Why would they work harder? And they're not accountable to anyone. And I think this is one of the main issues. So even if you do lots of professional development, disinterested teacher will just continue to teach the same way. And there's no inspection. In theory there is, but in reality there isn't. So it's very difficult to really push the system if you don't get the political groups to really invest in public education. And one of the theories is that actually no one is interested in public education in Lebanon, because most of the politicians have their own sectarian and private schools. So obviously they want the private schools to remain powerful. Why would they want the public schools to be strong?
I understand that in private schools you can be fired as a teacher, but public schools you can't. Is that true?
Yeah, you can be a foreigner.
But in private schools you can?
Yeah, you can, of course, yeah. Actually, it's considered to be a positive thing.
Let's see. I see a hand over there. Shara, is there? All right, go ahead, Shara.
What positive things do you see in Syrian refugee education in Jordan and Turkey that is superior to what we see in Lebanon?
So the question is about whether the education of Syrian refugees in Turkey and Jordan has better qualities and better performances than in Lebanon.
It's interesting. We did a regional conference on which brought the various countries. The thing is, in Jordan, you don't have the language issue. So language is not a barrier. In Lebanon, the language is a barrier, which means that children in Lebanon beyond, above 12 years old find it very difficult to enroll. In Jordan, you don't have this issue. So they come in and they enroll. And there isn't, the numbers are not as big, and they live in camps. There are these two huge camps in Jordan. I'm not saying all the majority, actually the majority of refugees in Jordan don't live in the camp. So there are still issues of tensions between the local and, struggle over resources, because Jordan has very limited financial and water resources. But I think there has been better cooperation between the government and the donors. In Turkey, actually, the government has been very cooperative. But in Turkey, you have a huge language issue because they don't speak Arabic. So, all the subjects are difficult for the children. So now they're opening special schools in Arabic, but the government is allowing coalition schools in Turkey, and they are accrediting it, so this is helpful. So there's the flexibility of the curriculum. I think one of the issues is that Lebanon sees it as a national, it's part of our dignity. If you don't teach the national Lebanese curriculum as if it's it's a heresy. The fact that many private schools don't do that And why do you want to only apply this to the Syrian is the issue. I think, however, I always felt from the outstart of this is that it can be an opportunity for Lebanon to really redo its whole educational system, because the issue is not with the students, because the Lebanese were struggling as much as the Syrian, and they are still struggling because the curriculum doesn't suit them. The fact that, if you live in a rural area in the south of Lebanon, your exposure to second languages is very, very rare. So why would you be expected to be fluent in French or English? And also this idea that we have to speak English or French. Like imagine like here, if someone tells you that you have to learn, Spanish, and you have to learn your math and science in Spanish, and otherwise you're no good for anything. So, this also has to do with how, the country perceives itself.
Yes, right there.
If there is no language barrier in Jordan, then why is the refugee percentage smaller in Jordan compared to Lebanon and Turkey?
So the question is, if there is no language barrier in Jordan, why do we find that in terms of percentage of the indigenous local population, that in Jordan is lower than it is in Lebanon? In other words, there are more refugees percentage-wise in Jordan.
Yeah. It has to do with the conflict and that it's quicker to get to Lebanon. That's one thing. Second thing is that some Syrian refugees came because they had families in Lebanon, so it was easier, they knew someone. And also because Jordan put restrictions on the refugees much earlier than the Lebanese did. And when the Syrian refugees started to go to Jordan, they put them in camps, and they had very limited mobility to move out of the camp, so you can't leave. So when we were interviewing the Syrian refugees when they came to Lebanon, one of the things they found that they preferred Lebanon because there are no camps and no restrictions on mobility. So it's easier for them to get into the sea and go somewhere, or to go back to Turkey and escape to Europe, etc. There was much, it was much easier for them.
Diana?
I was going to ask if the Lebanese government is concerned about having a large population of people who are unable to work and are not terribly happy with the government, and it seems like in a number of years this will be a bunch of grown-ups who don't particularly like the Lebanese government and don't have a job and are the vote.
Sure.
So the question is, when you have such a large population of refugee children that are not being educated properly or allowed to be educated properly, and then they're not being allowed to work, is this, as they grow older, is this going to be a large population of very unhappy people in Lebanon, and does that pose a national security risk for the Lebanese government?
I would be very worried if I were them. And we're doing actually now a study on the dropouts and what are they doing now, and to what extent it's likely they might join an extremist group. And just today before I came, I was reading an article about recruitment of these young people into extremist groups. It's a major worry. I think it's a bigger worry for the international community. I'm not sure why in Lebanon we're short-sighted in terms of this. There was a London conference a month ago where all the donors and the governments came to London to invest in education. And Lebanon promised to provide employment for 200 to 300,000. I'm not sure if they will or not, but I would be very worried, and I think it's a big issue. We see this is why a lot of those who are jumping in the sea and escaping and risking their lives also come from Lebanon. So when you go to schools in Lebanon, you see the list of names. There are many children who, their names has been, deleted because their parents have. And I can see why would they send them in the sea and risk their life, because in Lebanon there is no hope. And the funny thing is that when you talk to the Syrian children and you tell them, what would you like to do when you get older? They would say a doctor, an engineer, and all of these things, and you think like, really, you won't have a chance to do that. They really won't have a chance thinking about what they will have. And I was talking to Akram that my dream would be to do a longitudinal study and see what actually will happen with these children. Because I doubt that, many of them would even make it to secondary, let alone to university.
Just a quick note here. I mean, I think what Dr. Shuayb's criticisms are incredibly valid, but you also have to understand there's fairly high unemployment for the Lebanese as well.
Yeah.
So the issue, you know, I mean, the issue really is very complicated in that regard. And the other element for the Lebanese, I think for some Lebanese I should say, is that the Syrian government had occupied Lebanon from 1975 to 2005, and it wasn't the happiest of occupation. So there's quite a bit of bad blood, if you will, between the two countries. So again, this does not justify any of that stuff, but it's just to put a larger context into things.
And the numbers, you know, if you think about a third of the population being refugees, and we have issues of water and electricity shortage. So in Lebanon, we rely on generators, and we buy, you know, water. We have 2 bills for the water. You know, everything we have 2 of it. You know, so imagine on top of that, you have a third. You know, your population has increased suddenly, you know, by a third. It's not an easy challenge at all. And we see that Europe is like, you know, worrying about 1 million all across Europe, and you have a country of 4 million having suddenly this huge number. So it's not an easy challenge. To be, you know, on the other hand, to be honest, is that I think the Lebanese have been very, very, welcoming in many ways, and you find villages that really have given them free houses, etc. So there has been a lot of support from communities, but you can also understand the tensions that might come up.
So Noha had a question, and then we had a question there. So we'll start with Noha's question.
Other than the help of the NGO provide to the public schools in Lebanon, are there any effort like to have organized the parents? You mentioned before that there's minimum parents involved, the Syrian parents involved. Is there any way to get these people, these parents, a little bit more involved in their children's education?
So the question is about parents and their role and involvement in their children's education, particularly Syrian families. So aside from the NGOs and of course the government and its failure or successes in that regard, are these parents, can we get these parents to be involved more to help with their children's education?
Actually, the parents are very involved. They are, I was saying the teachers believe that they are not, but actually they are extremely involved and really concerned about the education of their children. But the issue is they don't speak English. So when you tell them how do you support your child at home, they said we can't help them. We simply just don't speak. They can help them with the Arabic. The Syrian children do very well in Arabic. Actually, they do much better than the Lebanese in Arabic because the Arabic language in Syria has always been extremely strong. But they can't help their children with all the and you can imagine the housing condition that they live in. The vast majority, I don't remember talking to a family that is less than 7 or 8 people in one room. And those who have rooms are the lucky ones. You have those who live in tents or in a garage or whatever. So, and despite this, they send their children to education and to school, and they want them to be educated.
Sir?
My question is, why would the Lebanese take in so many refugees if they can't properly educate?
So the question is, why would the Lebanese government allow that many Syrian refugees to come into the country if they're unable to accommodate them in any way?
I think they didn't really think that much. And because there's a group of Lebanese that think we should be, like if we stop sending, welcoming them, what would happen with them? So it's a humanitarian issue. And I think, it would be crazy not to let them in. Where would they go? But I think there should have been more collaboration from the international community also to take a bit of the pressure off Lebanon. While other countries were really very scared, Europe is still very scared to take them. So I think it's a failed duty from the international community, while the Lebanese did the right thing, in my view.
For a while, it appeared that the refugees will be there for a short period of time, too.
I think that's another
So nobody
element.
expected this to drag on for 4 or 5 years. And, with guns behind them, it's very hard to close the borders. And again, I would like to emphasize, as Dr. Shuayb has said a couple times already, imagine, if you will, 133 million Canadians arriving within 1 year. I didn't say Mexicans notice, because that's where you first imagine people crossing the border. I don't think there are 133 million Canadians, but mind you, just imagine 133 million Canadians crossing into the Dakotas in 1.5 years, and you can imagine the outcry that would happen in this country. We complain about 100,000 potential Syrian refugees, and there are states in this country that refuse to allow them in. So I'd like to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious about the profile of the typical Syrian refugee, because I've noticed that you mentioned that the parents, or this generation, that the parents are going to be more educated than their children. So what type of people are actually coming in? Because I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, you see both. You see from rural areas, and and this is the issue. Syria is a huge country. We're talking about 20 million population, but there are huge differences. For instance, I know in some of the NGOs where my friends work, the Syrian teachers are surprised to see children who've never been to school in Syria, even before the crisis. So, the Syrian government says that they have a zero illiteracy rate, but the reality is it's not true. We're seeing children who are 15 years old, they've never been in school in rural areas. And there was this issue of early marriages. We've done a study also on this, and Syrian girls used to get married age 16 in Syria and 14 before the crisis. So you see differences. You see the middle class, the upper class, and you see the very rural population. And these are the ones, usually they struggle the most. Also because you have, parents issues, etc. And you have also Kurds who don't even, speak Arabic very well. So this is another, and I didn't mention anything about the Palestinian Syrians, so the Palestinian refugees that used to live in Syria who also, became refugees another time because they had to come to Lebanon and also all the issues that they struggle with. So the answer is it's mixed bag.
Sure.
I was curious because you mentioned that for the Palestinian students, there were UNHCR schools.
UNRWA. Palestinian, yeah. It's called UNRWA. It was founded before.
But I was wondering if the same kind of response was being considered for the Syrian students, or and if not, why?
So the question is, for those Palestinians who became refugees in Lebanon after 1948, the schooling, the whole curriculum and all the infrastructure and teacher education, everything is managed by the United Nations Refugee and Works Agency, UNRWA for short. And they have been doing this since 1948. And the question that Professor McManus, who teaches anthropology of the Middle East here, by the way, and she's quite brilliant, is will the same thing be applied by the United Nations to Syrian refugees? In other words, will the United Nations take over the whole process of educating Syrian refugees in Lebanon?
Obviously, UNRWA was created before there was anything called UNHCR. So that's why, and it will stay as it is. There were actually interesting you asked this question because some people were saying, if we only have an UNRWA-like thing for the Syrian, things might get easier than managing this huge organization, UNHCR. I don't think there will be. I doubt it very much that kind of things would be created. Yeah.
Yes, please.
You said that they don't hire Syrian teachers that come in. Why is that? Because one would think they would want to utilize those skills in a population that speaks a completely different language.
So the question is that Dr. Shuayb mentioned that Syrian teachers are not hired by the public school systems in Lebanon. And the question is, why is that when especially these would be perhaps ideal teachers? They do speak a little dialect, but it's still Arabic, by the way. So.
Yeah, so the Lebanese and Syrian, they speak the same language, it's Arabic. It's because in Lebanon, the problem of the language is just that we in Lebanon have to learn math and science in a second language. It's the regulations. In public schools, you can only hire Lebanese teachers. You can't be a foreigner and be a public servant. So that's how the regulations are. And it's seen as a way of employment as well. Because you have, as Dr. Akram said, we have high unemployment rates, particularly among young graduates. So this is a way of, getting jobs. But, the thing to think about it is when the crisis is finished, then you won't have qualified teachers who will go back to Syria and teach. So, for the long term, it's going to have fire back again.
Yes, please.
You mentioned, especially with bullying, the high levels of ethnic tensions between Syrians and Lebanese. What, if anything, is being done to relieve these tensions?
So the question is about bullying that Syrian children are experiencing in the public school system in Lebanon and the tensions that emerge between local Lebanese students and the refugee Syrian students. Is there anything that's being done to alleviate that bullying process?
Okay, and the bullying, by the way, is not only between Lebanese and Syrian, it's also between the Syrian themselves. So you'd see like Syrians practicing on each other what they hear shabiha, or the various militant group might do to each other, particularly in the regime. So they would practice what they see, the violence that they see inflicted on others. They try to play that game. There are attempts now to look more into the psychosocial aspect. In the second shift, the government has introduced what they call social worker / counselor, where they do some work on the psychosocial. Usually it's not less about bullying, more about kind of like reflections, but not much. But now, attention is being invested. But there hasn't been much work between the two shifts and the tension that happened. The idea is that if you segregate, it will be better. And they used to do that, by the way, with the Lebanese before the crisis. When I used to research conflict across different sects in school, I used to go to school where the principal would say to the children from a different sectarian group, you better go to that school because the majority of students and teachers are from your sect, because I don't want any conflict. So, physical segregation was always kind of seen as the way forward, rather than dealing with the issues in the classroom and dealing with bullying.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we're dealing with the public schools and the national curriculum that we're discussing. As it is in this country, I'm sure in Lebanon, a big part of the whole process is to instill a sense of nationalism among students. So how do these migrants fit into the Lebanese sense of nationalism? And has there been a shift towards, particularly in history, towards opening up dialogues about nationalism, or including the Syrian nation or the Syrian history into the national curriculum?
So the question is about that most national curriculums, including in the United States, are meant partly anyway to develop a sense of patriotism through history and civic studies or what have you, about the country in which a person lives in. Now, obviously within Lebanon, that would appear to be the case, although, as Dr. Shuayb said, there are so many different curricula, it's clear Lebanese identity is a bit schizophrenic that way. But the question is there going to be a shift in that curriculum to the point where it becomes much more open and fluid sense of national identity rather than exclusive and segregating?
This is a very important question. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a civic teacher, and she told me, look, today I had to teach them about the flag. It's grade 1 class, and they have to draw the flag, obviously the Lebanese flag. So she gave the task to the children. Then when they shared with her their drawings, someone drew the Lebanese the Syrian coalition flag, or the revolution, the Syrian flag, the Kurdish flag, and so then she was like, what do I do? She was like really perplexed. The objective of the lesson is to teach the Lebanese flag, and teachers are not trained to manage this diversity in the classroom. So there are issues, and at the moment I don't think that there is any attempt to change this. And this is what we see with the Palestinians. Palestinians, when I worked with them, they had a sense of acculturation. They don't know anything about their history because they only learn about the Lebanese history. And this really made them feel angry, like, why don't we know? We should know what happened to our villages in Palestine. We should know about who our grandparents, homes, etc. But we only learn about your history, and our history tends to be like, very much Eurocentric as well. So Napoleon Bonaparte and all what have you, etc. You remember that? Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Do you think it's the job of the Lebanese government to teach the refugees about their own history?
So the question is it the responsibility of the Lebanese government to teach refugees about a different history, Syrian history in this case? With the school that you need to adapt the curriculum for whatever the student needs.
And that applies to math, science, any subject that they are learning. If I'm planning a lesson, to my students who tend to be graduate, I will change the way I teach to fit their need. If they are, more junior, then I will have to change. And it's the same with schools. You need to adapt your learning material to the student's interest. You can't teach about, a poet, French poet when students are not really interested. They would like to learn more about a local poet that they have. And I think this is, the curriculum needs to be relevant. We know if the material is relevant, we are engaged. If it's very irrelevant and you can't see the use of it, we know from ourselves. We first of all, we forget it after we do the exam, and we're not really interested, and nothing changes in us. And learning is about changing something in someone, and that's why our curriculum needs to be adaptive, flexible.
But you have to train the teachers to teach something they're not familiar with, like Syrian history or Syrian civics. Is it their job? Or you have to have resources to do something completely different from the Lebanese system.
So the question again, the follow-up question on this is, how can you attain that when you need so many resources just to retrain these teachers, the thousands upon thousands of teachers, to retrain them so they can accommodate this kind of large diversity? And is that even feasible?
This is a very important question again. I'll give you an example. Take the IB curriculum. Is it very popular here, the International Baccalaureate? Okay. What do you usually have in the International Baccalaureate? Usually you have very general themes, and the teacher has huge flexibility to choose whatever topics she would like to teach in her classroom. Okay, no? You don't think so? They do have a huge flexibility. Well, from what I teach the curriculum, and my teachers who teach the IB tell me that they have quite a lot of flexibility in choosing whatever topics they would like. Even the French curriculum, actually, you can also, they give you periods like churches. And you can teach about churches in whatever period and in whatever region, etc. So there is a lot of flexibility. Now curriculum around the world is moving to this flexible curriculum where the objectives are specified as learning competencies, but the topics remain flexible to suit the students' needs. And this is, you need to train the teachers. The French curriculum, they give you huge resources to do that. In the IB, they prefer not to, because they believe they kill the teaching profession. They think when they give you the resources, then they are making you a lazy teacher. You need to go around and you need to get your material and you need to, put together your lesson. Yes, this is in Lebanon there's a big issue with that, access to internet, even mastering the technology and all of this. That's why professional development is very important.
Clearly there are a lot more questions that we can have, but I would like to end here and ask you to join me in thanking Dr. Shuayb for the talk and the questions and answers. And thank you for being with us tonight, and we wish you all well tonight, safe travels, and good luck with your exams.